Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and in today's video we're going to be making a fabric cape for a vintage Kenner Star Wars Jawa. Now you often see these Jawas missing their capes and they actually look pretty cool without the capes on. It's a pretty nice looking figure, but if you want to have him complete then you need to have the fabric cape for him. In a previous video I've already shown you how to make a vinyl cape for the Jawa, which is this one here. Those look pretty cool and are actually fairly easy to do because it's just a fairly simple pattern that you cut out of some brown vinyl. The fabric cape, on the other hand, is going to be a little bit more complicated because the first thing we need to do is work out a pattern, and then we've got to work out how to sew it together. So that's what the project we're going to be working on today is. Let's get on with it. Okay, so here we have the little Jawa, and he's a fairly interesting figure because he's so small, which means that making his cape is going to be a little bit more tricky because it's also incredibly small. And there were no other capes made like this for the Star Wars figures. I think the most complicated one is this cape. There's just a lot going on with it. There are two pieces of fabric that are folded and sewn together. The little hood is one piece of fabric, and then the main body is made out of another piece of fabric which is sort of folded and sewn, and the sewing is mainly down the sort of the sides under the arms, although there is also a seam done at the front. So the first thing we need to do is actually make a pattern from this, and the easiest way to do that is to turn the cape inside out. Once the cape is inside out, you can actually see how it's constructed, and I will trace this onto some paper. I'll sort of carefully follow as close as I can to the original sort of shape of it and get my own version. I can then take that into Photoshop and work out a sort of a final pattern for it, but you have to do this inside out because that gives you a view of all of the seams and all of the sort of construction process that goes into it. So let me turn this inside out. It does look a little bit of a mess when you see it like this, but for me this is the best way of doing it because I can, as I say, see what it's made from and where it's sewn and all of that, and it gives you the basic shape. Yeah, so now that's inside out, I'm going to get some paper and we'll trace this onto some paper and do a few little measurements, and as I say, take that into Photoshop and we'll make a final pattern that we can work from. And here is that finished pattern. As you can see, I've transferred that into Photoshop and reworked it, and I think this should fit pretty closely. In fact, if I bring in the original cape, you can see that does match fairly closely. So once we get this all cut out and sewn together, I'm hoping it will look as close to the original as possible. But first we need some fabric, and I've been through my sort of bags of fabric, and I've got a few different shades of brown. Now this material is called toy knit or looped fleece. It's not the same as the material that they used for the original cape, but it's the same as the fabric that they used on capes in the sort of the Jedi era Star Wars figures, and it's a really easy material to work with, which is why I'm going to be using it. And as you can see, I've got two colours, two different shades of brown. I think neither is particularly correct. That one's a little bit light and that one's a little bit dark, but I think the darker one will do. So that's the one we're going to use. And if you want to get some of this fabric yourself, I will put a link in the description as to where I get it, so you can go and grab some of that. What we need to do though is actually transfer this pattern onto the fabric, and to do that I'm going to stick on the back of this some double-sided tape. I'm then going to cut this out. I'm then going to remove as much stick as I can from the double-sided tape just by sort of sticking it onto my jeans, and then I'm going to stick it onto this fabric, and we will cut out the two pieces and start sewing. It's a fairly straightforward process to do, so right, let's get on with that. Now comes the fun part, because we've got to start sewing this together. You'll have seen on the pattern there are some dotted lines, so on the main part of the cape we have to fold it over like that. So this is the inside that you're seeing at the moment. The outside is on the inside, and we need to sew down these edges here, so sort of under the arm and along the sort of skirt part of it. Well, we need to do that on both sides, and then on the hood we have to fold that in half, and then we're just going to sew down the back of this for the moment. The rest of the sewing is going to be sewing this onto the main part of the cape. Now the original cape does have a seam down the front, which you will see I have marked on this pattern. For this first go, I'm not going to bother sort of cutting that or sewing it. I want to see what it looks like. If it doesn't look right, what I'll do is I'll actually just cut along here, and then I will sew down as well, so we have a nice sort of even seam down the front. But I think it might look all right without that. So let's just get sewing and see what happens. So we'll sew these few seams first, and then I'll show you the two pieces and how we actually go about joining them together. So yeah, let's do a little bit of sewing. Okay, so all of those bits are now sewn. It's actually starting to look like a cape. The next bit is the tricky part, because we have to attach this little hood into the hole in the top of the cape there, but it's all got to be sort of inside out. So we've got to put this inside the cape. In fact, we have to turn this the other way round, so this is round the sort of correct way, so it looks like the hood. So if I just do that, see, that actually looks like the hood now. And if I bring in a Jawa, Just grab a Jawa here. It's going to sit over his head like that. We're going to then put this inside the cape, and we've got to line it up with the hole and then sew around. It's going to be really awkward to do, and I'm not really quite sure how I'm going to actually show how I'm doing this. You'll just have to sort of work with me and sort of try and understand as I go. So yeah, this has got to go inside the cape, in there, and then I've got to sew around the hole and sew this onto it. It probably would have been easier to do before I'd sewn this sort of together. I didn't really think that far ahead, but I reckon I can do it this way round. It might be, if you're doing this yourself, then actually sew this part on first before sewing the main part of the cape together. Or as well, it might even be easier if we actually cut down there, because I said on the original one there is a seam down the front. Maybe that's why they put a seam down the front, so that it's easier to sew around the head here. But I'm going to try and do this anyway, because I think this will work. It's just going to be a bit awkward to do. So let's see if I can get this inside here and get it all sewn on. Okay, so this is my first attempt at sewing that on. As you can see, it's gone horribly wrong. It's actually pointing in the wrong direction, and you can't even see the little Jawa's face there. So I'm going to undo that and have a second attempt. I think what's going on is that the hole for the neck is too small, so I'm going to cut that slightly bigger and have a second go. But the overall principle of it works. You know, that does actually look like a Jawa cape, even though it is wrong. You can see that we've got his hands through there, but yeah, the head is slightly wrong. So let me unpick that and I'll try again. But yeah, I'm happy with the sort of the overall principle of it. Yeah, but what I've done there to sew it has gone wrong. So yeah, let's start that again.
P-O-Y, P-O-L-L-O-Y, that is incorrect. Try again.
Right, this second go is looking a lot better. This is pushing my sewing skills to the limit. I'm not that great at sewing, as I've sort of mentioned before in previous videos. I know enough to make simple things, and this is sort of next level making for me. It's very tiny, and you're essentially sewing a sort of flat surface into a round hole, which I find particularly awkward. I'm sure a professional sewer would know a great way of doing this, but I don't, so I'm sort of making it up as I go along. But that has worked now. This is actually joined together okay. So there's the little hood which is sewn into that round hole. Making the hole a little bit bigger really did help. As you can see, it's actually sort of lined up quite neatly. So let's try this on the Jawa. Here's my little Jawa. Let's push him in, make sure his arms go into the armholes like so, and then we'll push his head through, and there we go, and that's that cape on. Actually, that's not looking too bad at all. Let me just push it so you can see his little face there. That is not too bad at all. That does actually look like a Jawa cape. I think it's a little bit of trial and error. I might have to make a second one, see if I can get this closer to the original. But as a first go, I'm very happy with that. And I do think the reason they have a seam on the front on the original is to help it be made, because actually making it without that is very hard work. So if I make this again, I think I will actually cut that at the front. Then you can sew the hood in, and then once it's all sewn in, you can then just sew down the front, so have a seam at the front. I think that would make it a whole lot easier. But overall, I'm very happy with how that's looking. That's a pretty good first go. So let me make a second one and see if I can make it any better. This second version is going a lot better. As you can see, I have cut down the front, and that's meant putting the hood part on is really pretty straightforward. Now all I've got to do is line up these two front edges and sew along there, so we have a little seam along the front. Then it will really look like the original cape, and yeah, it's a lot easier to make. So the first one does look pretty good, but certainly cutting along the front makes the construction of it a whole lot easier. So here is attempt number 2, and I'm much more happy with how this has turned out. It's a lot easier to make. Cutting down the front means that you have access to sew inside and sew the hood on, and as you can see, I've actually got that up looking pretty good, and we've now ended up with this seam down the front which looks like the original one, because the original one has that seam there, and I'm very happy with how this has turned out. It's a bit of an awkward thing to make just because it's so small, but it can be done, and I'm sure better sewers than me would make a better job of the sort of end result, but I'm still very happy with how this looks. Let's look at them all together. And here we go. Here is the finished version of the Jawa. My version is the one on the right, the original on the left, and then we have the vinyl cape Jawa in the middle. I'm really pleased with how this has turned out. It's certainly not the easiest of capes to make just because of its size, but if you want to have a go, I will put the pattern that I've made available on toy-polloi.com, so go there and download that. I'll also put a link in the description to the material that I've used, which is called toy knit or looped fleece. It's not exactly the same as the original fabric. As I say, it's more like the fabric that is used on the later Jedi figures, but I think it fits in very nicely with the sort of the general style and look of these vintage figures. So if you've enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And if you've really enjoyed it, then why not think about becoming a Patreon or YouTube channel member. You get early access to all my restoration videos and access to an exclusive series called On the Cutting Mat, which I upload new episodes to every month. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Toy Polloi. Subscribe for more great videos.